My first Deskbot deck was constructed after the first wave of support. Now with new support, it's time to revisit the deck and build anew. Similar to my Super Heavy Samurai revisit, I dropped the 2 copies of Gearspring Spirit, as the meta has shifted to a more anti-targeting environment, limiting its effectiveness. Due to main deck space issues, I also dropped all 3 copies of Machina Fortress, as this build is more Deskbot heavy due to more available Deskbot monsters. Finally, I dropped 2 of the 3 copies of 001, which I largely used as deck filler due to a lack of options last summer, as well as maximizing the usefulness of Inferno Reckless Summon. As previously mentioned, with 005 through 009 now available for the deck, I run 2 copies of 005, 2 copies of 008, and 1 copy of 009. While others may disagree, I will never view Deskbots as a pendulum deck if they do not receive any more pendulum monsters. Therefore, I think running Deskbots as a pendulum deck is a mistake. Think about all the good pendulum decks. The one major thing they all have in common is that their monster lineup is almost all pendulums. The principal advantage of this structure is why pendulums are so powerful in general. Once you set up your scales, your opponent will be on the receiving end of at least a 2 to 5 monster rush every turn. This is not the case for Deskbot decks, as even when the builder focuses on a pendulum themed build, about half of their monsters are not pendulum monsters, significantly limiting the chief power of the pendulum mechanism. Basically, Deskbot decks have at most 10 monsters available from the extra deck due to the 2 required for the scale, which creates less frequency and lower deck fluidity, all bad for a pendulum build. Add to those limitations the fact that all of the Deskbot pendulum monsters are tribute monsters, further creates problems via dead draws when the scale is not available. Deskbot Base has reduced the severity of this problem, but one will not always have base on the field. Also, the scale is rather vulnerable, similar to the problem that affects Magispectors. If 003 does not exist in the graveyard, the opponent will typically destroy 006, and if 002 is not in the graveyard, the opponent will typically destroy 005, thus their destruction pluses are of limited value. 007, 008 are just general no-bonus sitting ducks. This is of course if the opponent really even cares about destroying the scales. Furthermore, 006 and 007 have rather pathetic monster effect, making them a general summoning liability outside of the fact that they are Deskbot monsters that power up 003 and 009's effects. For those other Deskbot players out there, ask yourself honestly, how often do 006 or 007 actually help me win when they're monsters? Yeah, they don't help much, despite the rare 004-006 combo or 007 attack lock. Overall, 006 and 007 should only be run as pendulum filler, and that is really not a good idea when there are other better options for quality Deskbot decks. 005 is really the only good Deskbot pendulum monster, and 008 is serviceable. For the last monsters, I like running 1 copy of Neo-Spacian Grand Mole as an out to numerous monsters that can't be destroyed as a result of battle. Some might view Grand Mole more of a side deck card than a main deck card, but I get a lot of use out of him, more so than I think people would believe, so I like main decking him. Finally, I run 1 copy of Electromagnetic Turtle as a discard option for Twin Twister, or something just to set and stall when I don't draw what I need. Turtle's attack negation effect is obviously helpful for producing that extra turn to help expand your Deskbot play. I have seen some individuals choose to run Speedroid Menko to deal with OTK stoppage. There are 3 reasons not to run Speedroid Menko in this deck. First, it is not a guaranteed stop on Cosmos, thus Menko against a Cosmo will still commonly result in a significant amount of damage levied against your life points, or still even an OTK. Second, what does Menko do once it hits the field? It puts the opponent's monsters in defense mode. No Deskbot player should want the opponent's monsters in defense mode, because killing opponent monsters is typically not a problem for this deck, and that lightweight 007 is the only Deskbot that has piercing. Yes, 006 can switch positions, but as mentioned above, 006 is generally garbage. I want my opponent's monsters in attack mode, so they can feel the full brunt of my attacks. Third, Menko is only useful on the field if it can do something involving the extra deck, which is not common for a Deskbot deck. Most plays with Menko involve either Synchro or XZ Summon. Menko's level 4 standing is why it can be useful over a monster like Battle Fader, one part of a rank 4. However, Deskbots typically only have 004 as their standard level 4 with 1 or 2 techs, mine from earlier being Electromagnetic Turtle. And unless the rank 4 will immediately end the game, i.e. Cowboy or Utopia to Lightning, I would silently scream, "Why is he misplaying?" if my opponent ever XZ'd with a 004. Overall, if you are actually concerned about stopping an OTK with a monster effect, run Battle Faders. Some might also question the lack of a Gen X ally Birdman. Yeah, I don't like Birdman in Deskbot because outside of the combination of 003, its usefulness is substandard and inconsistent. Making Jet with him in a 007 is only a flashy play that serves little net benefit overall, and while synchro summoning is a possibility, there are not a lot of good synchro targets, especially in this build, as 005s are better used for Infinity rather than level 8s. Changing around the spells, not surprisingly, I drop 1 Dark Hole and 1 Book of Moon, as Blanket Destruction and Targeting are not as good as they once were. The 2 MSTs are dropped in favor of 3 Twin Twisters, as discarding with Deskbots is not a big deal, especially due to 004's effect, and those battle traps can be nasty counters. The change in the meta from decks like Necros and Cliffort with only pure Burning Abyss to Cosmos, Monarchs, and PK Fire Burning Abyss heavily limits the values of Inferno Reckless summons due to the opponent's ability to summon much more frequently from the deck, so those are out as well. The most controversial decision in some eyes for this build will be dropping the 2 copies of Machine Duplication. The main motivating factor for this drop is the addition of 3 copies of Deskbot Base. Duplication and Base completely clash due to the Base's attack increase effect. Some people run both Machine Duplication and Deskbot Base. Why do people do this? Pick one or the other, for playing both only breeds inefficient deck design. Some people try to argue that playing both is appropriate because you can activate Duplication first and then Base, but it really isn't appropriate, because what happens when Base is already on the field? Duplication is a dead draw. Really, one has to ask, which is more valuable, Duplication or Base? In my opinion, Base is more valuable, because as I discussed in my original Deskbot deck build, Duplication, assuming we're under a condition where you can actually utilize it, is only good when used with 002, 003, and most of the time with 005. But you can't use it with 001, I don't think you should use it with 004, and none of the new Pendulum, 06, 07, or 08, I don't think it's good with any of those 3 cards either. Realistically, I think that Duplication is a dead draw in the Deskbot deck more than half the time, but most of the time people, I guess due to observation bias, forget all those times Duplication is dead and just remember those awesome 002 combinations where they win at least +3. Base typically increases the total cumulative damage that Deskbots can do by at least 1500, which significantly increases their OTK possibility and field control ability, especially when 003 is sitting there just with a 002. You couldn't make any plays beyond that. Also, with the importance of getting 003 or 004 into the hand and on the field to start your major combination plays as fast as possible, the card exchange effect of Base is definitely helpful. Obviously, for this deck, the lack of 006 and 007, the third effect of Base is a moot point. Another somewhat counterintuitive choice that I run is 3 copies of Pot of Duality to increase consistency. The no special summoning condition of Duality seems to clash with the general idea of the deck, but it is appropriate when one changes the idea behind Deskbots. In my experience, while Deskbots can OTK, that should not be the overall principal strategy. If you want to run an OTK deck, in my opinion, go run Mermails or Fluffles, because I feel they're better pure OTK decks than Deskbots. Deskbots need to have the ability to strike outside of the big OTK combination, thus the addition of Pot of Duality. Finishing up the spell cards, I drop 1 copy of Limiter Removal, for Deskbots have now evolved to a point where Limiter is almost either a dead draw because you don't have enough attack power on the field, just one guy sitting there with 500 attack, or it's just overkill. Well, I can OTK you, but now I'm going to super overkill OTK you with Limiter Removal. Now, I'm not interested in that. I run 1 copy of One Day of Peace. Again, it is an incredibly underrated combo card in my opinion for decks that can't float, decks like Deskbots, but can explode later. 1 copy of Upstart, as the extra 1,000 life points are basically moot paired against the sheer power of Deskbots bring to the table, and 2 copies of Terraforming for faster access to Base, and because Base can swap itself, so Terraforming can act as a pseudo Upstart Goblin. For the trap changes, I dropped the 2 Trap Tricks Trap Holes, replaced by 3 Solemn Strikes. If they're too expensive, again, 3 copies of Void Trap Holes or Grand Horn of Heavens are also solid choices. I dropped the 3 copies of Call of the Haunted, simply due to deck space. Finally, I dropped the 2 copies of Liberty at Last and the 1 copy of Compulsory Evacuation Device due to the targeting inefficiencies, as well as the 1 Torrential Tribute due to the destruction inefficiency issues, and add 3 copies of Drowning Mirror Force. Again, too expensive, go for the Storming Mirror Forces. For when Despots control the field, they're powerful. When they don't, it is very difficult for them to get back in the game against an opponent's developed board. Outside of a few core possibilities like Cyber Dragon Infinity, the extra deck for a Despot deck really of little importance. I almost never go into it. With that said, I run 1 Leo, Keeper of the Sacred Tree, 1 Trishula, Dragon of the Ice Barrier, 1 Naturia Barkion, 1 Metaphys Horus, 1 Naturia Beast, 1 Herald of the Arclight, 1 Mistbird Clausolas, 1 number 23 Lancelot Ghost Knight of the Underworld, 1 number 38 Hope Harbinger Dragon Titanic Galaxy, 1 Cyber Dragon Infinity, 1 number S39 Utopia the Lightning, 1 Cyber Dragon Nova, 1 number 39 Utopia, 1 Castel, and 1 Sky Cavalry. Overall, I think Despots suffer in a lot of builds because too much attention is paid to making the deck pendulum-based, which does not work in my opinion, for despite the hype, Despots should not be an OTK or bust deck design, which is the general idea behind the pendulum build, in my opinion. Well, that is my new updated Despot deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.